Unbound, a ritual of transition, began as an investigation into transgender embodiment through improvisational structures, using rope, movement, and autoethnographic practice to explore themes of tension, identity, and transformation. While I initially set out to create a performance, the process itself became a site of discovery. This film reflects on 4 key realizations that emerged through making the work. Discovery 1. Rope became more than an image and metaphor. The rope began as an image of tightness and constriction, being wrapped, held, and pulled in different directions, as well as representational of my experience of chest binding as a trans-masc person. This symbolism continued throughout the process, but it evolved into an understanding of rope as a part of me, capable of playing many characters and forms. The question was the different ways that, different characters that the rope takes. Is the rope an object? When is it a friend? When is it a nemesis? When is it a witness? And yeah, what is the rope? Through my investigation and relationship building with it, rope became a vehicle for transformation. It started as my nemesis, something I worked against physically through the tension of wrapping and pulling the rope taut. Over time, however, it revealed many layers of story. One being that when the rope was limp, it showed its vulnerability. I could then hold it with care and compassion. My understanding of rope changed gradually through repetition and exploration, but there is one light bulb moment that stands out. One day, I mapped the rope as a character rather than an object, and decided to have a studio session with the rope as a friend. Immediate feelings after the improvisation with rope, with the rope as friend, this session. Yeah, I felt really emotional. I've just had a little breakthrough. Today was different because I hadn't really explored the soft element of the rope and the rope as a friend, and I think that really changed something. I realised this was based on the softness word association prompt that Gem and I connected with so strongly in our first session. But I was aware that Gem did raise this as well, that there is a softness that's part of the piece as well, and that it feels good when we go soft. I just haven't given that attention to the rope, and I think that's really crucial for this piece. This was important because even back then in our studio journal reflections, Gem recognised the necessity of softness and playfulness to ease the heavy intensity of the subject matter. Up to that point, my focus had largely been on the harder emotions associated with the rope as nemesis. The constriction and wrapping of the rope were important, but the process revealed that the key to the piece was the cathartic arrival at a place of acceptance. When I focused on genuinely connecting with the rope as a friend in the studio, I realised I had spent so long wrapping myself with the rope that I had never actually listened to it or considered what it needed from me. I needed to allow it to play a different character. When the rope was unattached to another object, it had a weight to it that allowed me to hold it like an animal or a baby. When I arrived at the action of holding it as a baby, I was flooded with emotion. Through my autoethnographic methodology, where bodily sensations and emotional responses guide the process, this told me that I had found something important. I realised that the rope was me. I've been fighting with the rope, I would say, and I've only been really using it as a restriction and a wrapping, and that focusing on that because maybe that's the difficult pain feeling. This was a key turning point. By identifying with the rope, I began to feel compassion for it. I saw that the rope embodied my own inner demons, struggles I have wrestled with throughout my trans journey, as well as my broader journey with myself. These struggles are also entangled with external social conditions. The process revealed that only through befriending and holding these difficulties with compassion can we move towards acceptance of ourselves. Discovery number 2. Autoethnography. Transition is non-linear, cyclical. This discovery feeds directly into the first section, building on the idea that the difficulty of the creative process itself holds revelations. This became key to the methodology of embodied and emergent performance making. At first, I tended to interpret emotional difficulty as evidence that I was failing, as I struggled to continue producing the work. Through reflection, I realized that my emotional responses were revealing important information about the piece itself, aiding me to formulate the narrative and adjust the performance. Knowledge was being generated through internal bodily and emotional states, experientially rather than intellectually. When I leaned into this, the piece continued to grow. When I resisted listening to my body, the development became stunted.
Feeling at a loss right now?
I was not separate from the work, I was the work. My body kept interrupting my plans, and those interruptions improved the piece. One studio moment stands out. I had had a particularly difficult week. The project felt heavy and hard. I pushed through, arrived at the studio, and had a breakdown. I called a close friend who encouraged me to take the day off and be gentler with myself.
I am procrastinating going to the studio right now. I feel scared.
Reflecting the following day, once I had calmed down, I realized my body had been telling me something. It was too heavy. The emotional weight of making such a personal piece alone felt like trying to drive with the brakes on. My body was stepping on the brakes, while my mind and self-imposed pressure were pushing me forwards.
The project is so personal that like everything I do in it affects me. And if I'm feeling stuck or sad or heavy, it's in the piece, or it's in the rehearsal of the piece, or it's in the difficulty of not being able to rehearse in the piece. So it's such an expression and reflection of my inner state and inner struggle. And I'm actually, like, in a meta way, struggling with making the piece.
I had to listen to my body and ease off the gas. These experiences became data. They revealed that I needed to lighten the piece. I began asking myself, what do I actually want to do in today's session? The answer was improvisation. I wanted to freestyle and move with more freedom. I put on a more adventurous and upbeat track from my performance playlist, which immediately increased my willingness to practice because it no longer felt so emotionally heavy. I had been wrestling with the rope as nemesis section, which represented the most difficult emotional peak of the piece. This experience and the playful studio session that followed told me that something needed to change. So I split the middle section in two, creating a lighter and more adventurous stage before condensing the most intense material into something more manageable.
I've just realised that section that I've just changed to be softer was completely from me, from responding to my body and my psyche and mental capacity. My way of working with this and my avoidance of it was telling me and informing me about how the piece should be made and what is inside the piece.
The process repeatedly disrupted narratives of linear progress. Through cycles of failure, repetition, inspiration, and becoming tangled, transition emerged as contradictory, unresolved, messy, and chaotic. Rather than moving neatly forwards, the process revealed transition as cyclical and ongoing, reflecting a core element of the outcome itself. The third discovery was that collaboration changed the research. Having trained in visual arts, I come from a tradition that often values solo authorship, individual ownership, and complete artistic control. Even within performance-based practices at art school, collaboration was not strongly encouraged or readily available. Only through attempting to create this performance largely on my own did I realise how difficult that approach was for me.
What I'm realising through this process is having like such a personal project. In some way it's great because you have control over what you want to do, and I think sometimes I find it hard to like, how do I work with others and do what I want to do. Then I think, oh, it's easier to work alone, but it's really not. It's actually so much harder. I really don't want to work alone, and I guess it's also being new to this city. I don't really have the people yet.
One of the most important discoveries was that letting go of control does not mean losing authorship. As the director of the piece, collaboration allowed the work to grow beyond me rather than diminish my role within it. After Jem became unavailable following the pilot study, I felt out of my depth. I was not yet integrated into a creative network and struggled with the idea of finding new collaborators. However, as discussed in the previous section, carrying the project alone quickly became exhausting and drained the joy from the process. Reaching breaking point forced me to reach out. I spoke to friends, creative and non-creative alike, and accepted the support that was being offered. These people became essential to the development of the piece. Through workshops, conversations, and feedback sessions, I was challenged, supported, and repeatedly asked questions that helped me to uncover meanings I had not yet fully articulated. The work quickly began to take shape and form. This experience has fundamentally changed how I want to work in the future. I now see myself working collaboratively, either as a creative director with stronger ownership over the central vision, or as an equal collaborator within a wider team. Creating work of this scale entirely alone does not suit me or my practice. Collaboration also helped transform ideas into manageable and repeatable sections. At this stage of my practice, I find setting choreography and structuring material particularly difficult. Others became my additional eyes, helping me edit out ideas that I was emotionally attached to, but that ultimately added little to the work or made it unnecessarily complicated. I was repeatedly asked about my intentions within each section, which challenged many of my assumptions. For example, in the transition to the adventure section, where I perform without the rope, my intention was to embody a loss of control over my body. I wanted to include moments where I appeared puppeteered before eventually returning to the rope and wrapping myself again as a form of solution. My focus had been primarily on the movement itself. However, my creative consultants continually redirected my attention towards why I was returning to the rope and what cutting it represented. This shifted my focus towards narrative intention and ultimately created greater clarity within the movement. Their questions helped me navigate a section that I had previously struggled with because I was trying to include too many competing ideas. By letting go of control of the work and allowing external players to hone my ideas, the performance was able to come into itself, and I felt supported in my emotional journey. Ultimately, the moments of collaboration in the studio were where I found the deepest joy in the process. The fourth discovery was the importance of improvisation over choreography. When working from the improvisations recorded in the pilot study, I initially felt I should begin to create set movements from these materials. Yet attempts to fix movement through choreography reduced the sense of uncertainty that was central to the project. Instead, I still needed forms of improvisational structure to guide me through the piece. I was trying to achieve this through setting movement, and was challenged by one of my creative consultants who outlined 3 aspects that could act as a structure. I began to practice through 1, the intended emotional state of myself in the scene, 2, my relationship with the rope, and 3, the intended audience gaze on the performer.
I'm like kind of turning like aware of the audience.
I learned that rehearsing a performance does not necessitate setting movement or removing uncertainty, but that these improvisational structures, emotional state, rope as character, and audience gaze, can act as parameters within the unknown. By the end of the process, I realized that the unknown element of what might happen during the performance was actually key to the integrity of the piece. Through improvisation, I was required to practice the same trust that the work itself was advocating. I became curious about what might be revealed and what might happen in the moment of performance. Whenever I attempted to set movement, the authenticity of the feeling seemed to diminish. It became clear that the performance was something the performer needed to genuinely experience in the moment. It was not simply a representation of catharsis, it was a one-time ritual of release and expression. To facilitate this, I discovered that it was necessary to remain responsive to the present moment rather than relying on perfected and rehearsed movement. Even in the last few days before the performance, a part of me resisted to rehearse the entire thing through with the finished track, leaving the content up to chance and my presence in mind and body. I have not rehearsed with music yet. I could have today, could have yesterday, but I felt in my body a lethargy around it, and I was like, maybe I don't need to. I also think a lot of it will just be like whatever happens in the moment. I've kind of gone through little bits with the music, but I've not done one whole run through, and I think that's maybe part of it, because I was just thinking I am really curious about what comes out, but I think the internal logic is there that allows me enough structure to play in an unstructured, improvised way. Part of the emotional charge I carried as a performer came from not fully knowing what would happen next. A key purpose of the performance was to encounter embodied discoveries that could not have been planned in advance. Through this authenticity, I could offer my strongest attempt at transmitting emotions and stories to an audience that could never fully know my internal world. For that internal world to emerge, uncertainty had to remain present. This uncertainty also reflects the liminal space of transition itself, and supports one of the central conclusions of the piece, that trust must be found in both yourself and the unknown. By placing myself as performer in a situation where I had to continually respond in the moment, working with improvised structures rather than fixed choreography, the preparation process itself required me to let go of my fear of uncertainty and of getting it wrong. My acceptance of improvisation therefore parallels the narrative of self-acceptance explored within the work. Both involve stepping into uncertainty and learning to trust yourself despite not knowing exactly what lies ahead. In a society where trans people often face misunderstanding, lack of acceptance, and limited representation and education on our trans history, cultivating that trust in yourself, others, and the unknown becomes essential. Looking back, these discoveries are not separate. Again and again, the process taught me the same lesson. Meaning emerged when I stopped trying to control outcomes and began listening instead. To the rope, to my body, to collaborators, and to uncertainty itself. In many ways, this mirrors the process of transition, which requires trust in embodied knowledge when certainty is unavailable. In future, I am interested in exploring how ensemble-based performance might extend this line of inquiry, particularly the potential for collective embodied performance to contribute to transgender epistemology. This approach may create opportunities for trans people to generate embodied knowledge through material engagement, improvisation, and collaborative processes of becoming. These discoveries have fundamentally changed how I understand and carry out my artistic process, marking the beginning of integrating improvisational movement methodologies into my art practice, expanding into the world of performance art, theatre, and dance.